Students, let's talk about a little bit about the evolution of Ethernet. Students, as I told you, the Ethernet was developed in 1970s, and since then it has gone through 4 different generations. Started off with what we know as the standard Ethernet, and as I told you, today we are up to the 10 gig Ethernet. So students, as you can see on the slide, we have got 4 different generations of Ethernet, which are part of the Ethernet evolution. The first one is your standard Ethernet, which can support the data rates of up to 10 megabits per second. Then you've got the fast Ethernet, which raised that bar, and it could support data rates of up to 100 megabits per second. And then we have got gig Ethernets or gigabit Ethernets, which is 1 gig per second Ethernet, and then you've got 10 gig Ethernet. And most of the datacom equipment today, it actually supports the 10 gig Ethernet today, and that is what the data rate is for today's data communication systems in most of the applications that we have got. Students, सबसे पहले बात start करेंगे about the standard Ethernet or the original form of Ethernet that was created back in 1970s. Students, this standard Ethernet, it was able to support data rates of up to 10 megabits per second. Students, most implementations have moved to later evolutions of Ethernet. As I told you, most of the Ethernet applications that we have got, they are using either the 1 gig Ethernet or the 10 gig E Ethernet, and 10 gig E ports in our switches and routers are very common today. But students, having said that, there are some of the properties of this standard Ethernet that are still persistent and that are still kept as we move from standard Ethernet to the different evolution stages. Students, we'll talk about those properties to start with, and we have got the first property as the connectionless and the unreliable nature of the service that Ethernet provides. Students, to start with, let's talk about the connectionless nature of this Ethernet. Students, connectionless, as I explained to you earlier in the previous discussions, it does not mean that there is no physical connection between 2 points A and B. What connectionless essentially means is that the frames are completely independent from each other. So when you've got a large transmission that you need to send from the source to the destination, you can actually you can divide that, you can encapsulate the packets and divide that in the form of different frames. And each frame can actually take its own specific route, and it does not need to be sent in a particular order. That is what connectionless means, and that is how we send our frames from point A to point B, from the source to the destination in the case of Ethernet. Students, connectionless also means that we don't need to set up a connection ahead of sending our data between our source and the destination. Students, we have got the connection-oriented phenomena in which we need to set up a connection, then we transfer the data, and then we have to tear down the connection. And for the duration of the connection, the resources are reserved for that data transfer only. Students, Ethernet by nature does not need that. Ethernet by nature is connectionless. Students, फिर बात करेंगे कुछ unreliable nature of the Ethernet की. Students, in the case of Ethernet, we have got, because we are operating in a connectionless mode, we do not have any way, if the frames are corrupted and they do not make it to the destination, we do not have any way to know about that. Students, coming to the upper layer, layer 3 uses IP as a protocol in the TCP/IP protocol suite. And students, IP is also unreliable. There is no way for us to know whether the frame is lost on layer 3 as well. And students, we come to the next layer, which is the transport layer. Now, transport layer has got 2 different transport protocols. One is the UDP, the Unreliable Transport Protocol, User Datagram Protocol, and the second one is TCP, the Transmission Control Protocol. And students, the TCP is the reliable one. So if you're using TCP, which is the case in most of our applications these days, then TCP will ultimately know that the frame is corrupted. So students, just to summarize, the Ethernet is a connectionless service. it is an unreliable service, but this is what is being used in our wide Ethernet, in most of the applications of data communication these days.